Welcome to Upthinking Finance, a podcast that offers a unique and discerning view of economics and financial planning. Here is your host, Emerson Fersch.
Welcome to another episode of Upthinking Finance. Author John Kenneth Galbraith wrote in his book, Money, Whence It Came, Where It Went, that the love of money is the root of all evil can conceivably be disputed. Adam Smith, for many a prophet of only slightly less than scriptural authority, thought in 1776 that of all the occupations on which man had to that time engaged, war, politics, religion, violent recreation, unrequited sadism, the making of money was socially the least damaging. What is not in doubt is that the pursuit of money or any enduring association with it is capable of inducing not alone bizarre, but ripely perverse behavior. So on that happy note, it's my pleasure to welcome back from Northern Ireland a returning guest, Melissa Ciummei. Melissa, thank you for joining me again on Upthinking Finance.
Thank you for inviting me.
So a lot has changed, I think, in the last 2 years when we first spoke about central CBDCs, Central Bank Digital Currencies, and digital ID. And so I thought it would be good to first, for anybody who hears these terms but kind of maybe gets them a little confused, if you don't mind just sort of laying out a foundation of what they are, and then we'll go from there.
Well, the problem of what they are, it's everything that's beneficial with fiat for us, which is very little. It's that we have some level of anonymity and autonomy. That is being removed, and the central banks are going direct with this programmable currency. But that's what seems to be happening along the lines of Europe. In the US, it's pretty straightforward now that they're going to go along the lines of stablecoins. Stablecoins, it's an excellent word because it sounds stable coins. It sounds something that, you know, that's fairly safe. It's still only backed by a fiat currency, so it'll be one-to-one backed with the dollar. And it's every bit as programmable, trackable, traceable. So it's everything got exactly the same as a CBDC. Programmable money would be the most dominant thing that people would need to think about when they think about a CBDC, except now there's an intermediary with the stable coins.
Got it. So I thought what we do is let's start with, and this is my kind of, macro low-level understanding of all this, but it seems like I thought what we could do is start with the EU, work our way into your neighborhood in the UK, and then cross over here to my side of the Atlantic and talk about what's going on in the US. My observation, at least from what I read, and again, this is very high level, is that the EU seems to be the one that's the most pressing to get both of these in place as soon as possible. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement. Well, the precursor is the digital ID. So if put CBDCs and stablecoins on hold and look at digital ID, because you need the data. The CBDCs are just the framework. So you can't program without the data to program. And they are really trying to push digital ID in the UK. We have a huge immigration problem with unvetted and the associated problems that go along with that. And there's problems particularly for women, completely culturally different. So what the UK has done as they have come out, first of all, during the COVID time, they come up with the idea of the NHS app. And this goes back again to the identity in the digital world. So we have the playbook of how they're going to get in digital ID. And we see that now playing out in real life. So they're floating the idea that for the migrant population, they would need some sort of biometric data, digital ID, in order to track them. That is already in place with the e-visa. And with the e-visa, it says what you're allowed to access. Similar to what it said on the identity in the digital world, what products, services, and information you can access, conversely, what is closed off to you. If you read what it says, I think I actually have it right here, what it says in the e-visa. It says what rights you have in the UK, for example, for worker to claim benefits, and you have to get a share code to prove your immigration status. So that right there is indicative of what we pointed out during the COVID pass, and now it's happening in real time. Then we also have the emergence of the BRIC card and the NHS app. That is our healthcare. So in order to access the app, you have to provide digital ID for it to work in a capacity, and then the BRIC card for licenses. And they're trying to reduce the age of voting down to 16, and that will be brought in then, that, we can get these young kids. It's so easy, just, scan your face on your phone and go ahead. Quite similar to what's happening. It's not as overt to what's happening in America, but under the big, beautiful bill, quite similar. You have E-Verify for employment, and also for the border crisis, there's biometric surveillance being brought in for the border crisis. So, yeah, the parallels are strong. Will there be resistance? There doesn't seem to be. I think that there's very few circles that have actually recognized this at all. And what's happening with stablecoins, you might be using stablecoins right now. And I mean, would you know if your dollar that you put into the bank was being converted into a stablecoin? Would you even know? No.
So with the EU, it seems to me, and again, this is an observation, and I do a fair amount of reading, and I've mentioned before I subscribe to different analysts, economic analysts, over in Europe, and you get a different view of things. It seems like it's you've got, and I guess I'm pronouncing her name right, this Ursula von der Leyen. She's attempting to hold together what appears to me to be a very fragmented, very fragile kind of situation over there, in terms of certain countries wanting to go their own way. They speak one thing, but they do another. France is one, Italy's another. And then, you read, and our mutual friend Alex Craner just kind of wrote about, he called it the EU finally striking the iceberg. And he highlighted, this was kind of capped with the recent trade deal that Trump negotiated with where the U.S. is, the EU is agreeing to buy $750 billion of energy and a bunch of military stuff, invest another $600 billion in the U.S. economy, open all the member nations to zero tariff trade, and then in turn, the U.S. gets to put a 15% baseline tariff on EU-produced goods, including cars. And then he mentioned the comments she made to China, which, something along the lines of, your relationship with Russia and views on the UK are the problem here. And Xi Jinping, just basically said, no, it's your own issues and your problems and have nothing to do with us. Then there's Qatar and, all these, what's that, the social responsibility rules that they put on everything. They're looking at, moving their energy exports somewhere else that's a little more corporate friendly. So it's just kind of like a one after another of these geopolitical, political, economic losses. And so my question to you is how much longer? I mean, you've got this push to get this currency in place and this ID system, and really as a means to kind of hold this whole thing together. But it gets, from somebody like me who doesn't live there, I read stuff like this, it seems like it's falling apart.
It is falling apart because the reason that it's falling apart, they really pushed the immigration across Europe with the UN migration. And that has caused so many problems that now resistance is absolutely boiling. And you have reform coming into the UK, and they're merging and snowballing as a party because people are just not happy with it. So this move to force us all in to create the problem, encourage the reaction of the solution for digital ID for migrancy. This has absolutely backfired. And now there's so many countries. You have Poland, you have the south of Ireland, you have the UK. Absolutely, the people are up in arms with what's happening, and they're very aware of what the solution is going to be that offered for this, and they're not on board with it at all. And that's when everything starts to crack apart. When the people start to realize what's going on, everything does start to fracture. So I don't know how long they can try to keep it going. They're trying to track, they want assets registry in the EU. They're trying to push it that force you to enter your savings into the system, because if you have an understanding of the system that it's based on debt and consumption, when you can no longer encourage consumption and debt creation, this whole thing falls apart. And they're trying to force more, or I explained it to, the way I've always explained this, 2008, hot air balloon, a hole ripped through it, QE to pump it up. In 2019, that really, really ripped, and they're trying their best to put as much into this hot air balloon that's coming down. And they know that it's coming down. Their hope is that they will have the new AI system in place where we're moving into the subscription pay to play economy, where they will own everything. So will they get that in place in time? I do not think so. I don't think that they're capable. I think that just as much as so many people have their heads in the sand, it would seem that they have their heads in the sand about the reality of this playing out. I can't see how it's possibly going to work. There isn't enough time. This is something that would need to be introduced over decades, and they just don't have decades. I mean, with Trump, with what he's doing with the stable coins, that might solve the US debt problem short term, but it's a short term fix for a long term problem. So it's ultimately that's going to run out of road as well.
That's a really good point. And that was something I was going to ask you, which I want to get back to in a bit. So the UK, I know when we talked before, it sounds like, I forget what it was you said, something along the lines of, yeah, people voted for Brexit, but it's not something that's actually happened. And so from what I gather, the digital currency, these are my words, is maybe taking a backseat to more of the ID. The ID, which you kind of mentioned before, seems to be the pressing kind of issue. Is that a fair observation, particularly specific to the UK, or am I not reading that correctly?
The same way that I described it with the executive orders, the big beautiful bill, the Genius Act. So it's similar here. You have to have the rails. So the digital ID, that's kind of provides the rails. It's a whole framework. They are touting bringing in CBDCs in October of this year, really just kind of starting to push them, but then that they'll be brought in further down the line around 2028 is where they're also talking about them. Similar to, I mean, it's not hard to figure out how they plan to bring them in, because we've seen what they've done with the dollar in America. We've seen that what they've done with the ZiG in Zimbabwe. So it will be brought, in order to create a new currency, you have to create a demand for it. It doesn't work if there's no demand for it. So what they're going to do, more likely than not, they will issue welfare in stablecoins or CBDCs, and they will demand taxes. That's what they've done with the ZiG. Taxes, 50% of taxes had to be paid. This is in Zimbabwe with the ZiG. With the, Executive Order 14247, is it? That's kind of putting that in place where they're removing cash, that all payments through the US government are going to be digital. The framework is very much being set in America to introduce all of this, and nobody seems to be really joining the dots about it.
So, okay, so let me ask you this, because then in the US, you mentioned the Genius Act, and maybe we can get into a little bit more of that. And I know we talked about before when we spoke on the phone about real ID, but it's my observation here that the digital ID doesn't seem to have really taken hold. The currency side of it seems to be where the direction's going. And then I think one point of relief, at least, again, maybe I'm not seeing the big picture, but one of the first things Trump came out and said, I think in January, was, there's going to be no central bank digital currency. And I also think that and maybe that's just semantics, so you can correct me if that's wrong. but the other side of it is where you have the Europe trying to hang on and pull everybody together. There is an element of states' rights here, and states doing things that are best for them. And I don't know if that's just an illusion or if there is some element of protection because of the autonomy of each state in the union. Abortion is an example. It's off subject, but states should decide, what their rules are on that, and then people, if they live, they don't like the rule of one state, they go somewhere else. And so, I guess I'm from my perspective living here, it seems to me that there's some room for protection against some of this, or am I just completely misreading it?
Well, with the real estate, that is controlling the transportation. That's controlling your personal transportation. I don't know why there wasn't more pushback against the idea that you have to have this specific ID in order to travel in your own country. Why is your license? I don't need a passport to go to mainland UK because we are part of the UK. So why was there not that pushback in America? I know that I think 13 states already have mobile driver's license, and I can't remember the name of the site. I'll get it for you and send it to you. But it basically shows how your real ID links in to your digital ID. So America is pushing forward with ID, but it'll be function creep, and it will be for your convenience. They'll make it incredibly inconvenient if you don't. I was over in Berlin last week, and they ask for your passport. Like every 15 steps, they ask for your passport. I was at the top of the steps and literally went down to board the plane. Can I see your passport again? Like, do you think I can shapeshift? What do you think happened between there? I think, well, what's that about? Because the other one, there's if you were EU, you could go straight through because you can scan your passport, scan your face, and you can go straight through. If not, you had to go through. So there's a massive queue this side. But if you're willing to scan your face, no queue. So that's what they're going to start applying in America. So the idea of seamless travel, and that came up in, I think that was in the Big Beautiful Bill. So if you're traveling within America and it's going to take you 3 hours to get to the airport versus 1 hour through the airport, how many people are going to buy down and just use their biometric ID?
So we have this thing called Global Passport where, we get the TSA plus, we haven't been traveling overseas in a few years, but where you get a fast pass through customs and all that. You went through this background check. We had to go to, one of these, the Port Authority or something. And once we did it, the renewal was a no-brainer. I mean, we just literally applied online. But to your point, you go online, and for the people that are waiting in these big, long lines that aren't TSA, there's this thing called Clear, which is what you're talking about, the fingerprint and the facial thing. And you see people just, they don't think about it. It's like, okay, I just don't want to wait in this line anymore. And no, I get it. I get it. So
You even think of the scanners at the airport, and everybody just goes through the scanners now because the person in front of them goes through the scanners. Legally, you don't have to go through the scanners. You have the right to refuse, but there's nothing to tell you that you have the right to refuse. So when those scanners they were brought in after it was it the tube bomber and the underwear bomber, both of which were failed attempts, which were incredibly convenient to bring in this scanning of your body. So everybody is accepting of that now. At the last time you travel, I'm sure you just watched. I refuse to go through it, and you get punished for it. They swab your bag, they hold your bag, but they already have people conditioned to you're accepting your whole body being scanned. So it's a very small step to just go your face. So they have very much conditioned people towards this. That has been in the process. But I mean, if you think of the first, there was a 1996 NSA paper making a mint cryptocurrency or something like that. I think it was NSA. So that was around the first time so this has been floated for a long time. They knew that the currency was going to break because historically you just have to have a look at it. And the average, I think, fiat currency lasts about 27 years. So they knew from 1971 that the clock was ticking. So they have been trying to get in a new system from then, and they have been conditioning us towards this. It's just at what stage are people going to say no? It's even with the big beautiful bit. It's the idea that it's like moving towards. It's supposed to be efficiency, but in order to be more efficient, you have to accept mass surveillance. And people don't seem to be recognizing it. And that's the part that I really don't understand, because I see it everywhere.
Yeah. So efficiency and convenience. Yeah, I guess that's the same thing. But so let me ask you this then. I mean, we're, what are we now? 6, 7 months into, a new presidency here. It's hard to know, at least I think most people would agree. It's really hard to know what's fact and what's fiction in terms of what's going on with the administration. You wonder if part of this is just kind of a deception and, on distractions over here to get things done over here, flush out all the rats that exist in the government. I mean, who knows? But has there been any positives? I mean, does the Genius Act have any kind of positive impact as an example on Europe or I mean, I'm kind of curious as to what is going on here. Does it have what's the influence? That's the question on what's going on where you are. How about that?
It won't necessarily affect it, but the benefit of the Genius Act is that what it's allowing is private companies can now buy stablecoins from the government. So there's about 3.5 trillion in excess reserves. So again, you have to. So how do we get more debt? So Scott Bessent's job is to sell treasuries. Okay. So how does he get that done? Well, he can tap into like a private-public partnership. So he can give you the right to buy these stablecoins and issue these stablecoins. So instead of a central bank doing it, he's allowing private firms. So therefore, private firms will be allowed to censor you, program your money, shut you out. But in order to do that, you have to the idea is then it will get bigger. So initially it'll be tapping into these excess reserves. And as the stablecoin market increases, that creates a market for treasuries because they're going to be backed by the dollar, which is debt. And that allows this debt problem to be solved. If you look, when Trump first got in, the first thing that I looked at was his cabinet. So it's irrelevant if you think he's a good guy or a bad guy because it's by your actions. So if you look at at who he surrounded himself with, you have Elon Musk, who was he wanted to create an Amazon of finance with X.com. He paired along with Confinity's Peter Thiel to create PayPal. And then you have David Oliver Sacks, who was the crypto and AI czar. He was brought in. He was also working for Confinity and PayPal. Then you have Scott Bessent, who worked under Soros to short the pound. So he knows how to manipulate currency. So it was obvious very early on that this was going to be about moving into a currency reset or solving financial issues within the Trump administration. Even, who's called J.D. Vance, protege of Peter Thiel. And now Peter Thiel has been given access to all that, his data silo for more efficiency. But you have access then that you can actually create a digital ID profile. Once they start gathering your records, you can already create a digital ID profile without you submitting to having a digital ID. They can create one already. So that's the backing that's who Trump brought in. So then you go, okay, so that was my initial thought. Then what has he done? Well, you've seen, like I said, I think it's 14247 executive order. Not I can get a look at that. You've heard that. 14247. That was so basically government going cashless. Then the Genius Act also allows for payments and taxes to be done through stablecoins. So they're creating a demand for it. And then you had Fed Now, that was 2 years ago. So the infrastructure's there. So the rails are there, the rails, Fed Now is the rails. The train is the Genius Act, and the Executive Order 14247. That's clearing the way for this to go ahead. So it doesn't matter if it was Kamala doing this, would you be in favour of it? Would you trust it? So really don't look at who the figurehead is. And Scott was saying that he had a tweet. Stablecoins could grow into 3.7 trillion market by the end of the decade. Now that just happens to be the same amount that are in excess reserves. A thriving stablecoin ecosystem will drive demand from the private sector for US treasuries, which back stablecoins. He's telling you what the whole purpose is. This newfound demand could lower government borrowing costs and help rein in the national debt. So that's what they're about.
There's a part of me that, on one hand, you feel like, okay, you see some things. I've seen Vanguard just yesterday. I read something about Vanguard, State Street, and BlackRock getting called out for manipulating the energy markets. The rental, the all the property they own that sit vacant, that caused prices to go up. And you think, okay, maybe there's some hope. And then there's the other side that just seems like, it's just politics. And, I don't want to go down that road because you want to feel like there's some real change. But sometimes it just feels like it's just kind of the same old thing, and I know we've talked about this before, but there just seems that there's so much just wrong that, it's a battle in my head. And it's like, okay, is Trump really the smartest guy in the room? And he's really just operating, what do they say, 5-degree chess or 5, whatever that is. And we're just all kind of, watching and trying to figure it out. Or is it really just, what you see is what's going on. And it's like you said, we're still moving ahead towards this more computerized, centralized kind of a situation. I mean, I don't know if that's a question, but I mean, maybe that's the question, Melissa, is where do you see things in, let's just say, 5 years based on what you see now?
I think they're probably going to trial it, and more likely than not, everywhere that CBDC has been trialed, it has failed. So, and mathematically, this credit is broken, and they're trying to paper over the seams. So, how long is it? I mean, this has the potential to cause more inflation with what they're doing with stablecoins because it's reintroducing more money into it. So where is that money going to be introduced? Are they going to program where it's introduced? Because, well, I mean, when we spoke, we're in agreement that it's inflation to the moon. There's no way out, and that's from the IMF paper that financial inflation coupled with financial repression to liquidate government debt. So this was a plan. They also have another paper through the zero lower bound where they talk about negative interest rates. So when you start removing money from the economy, physical money, that allows for the introduction of negative interest rates. So that's where they're going to go next. That force away from end savings. Not that Americans tend to have, I think the average is 60,000, but the median is only 8,000 in savings. But that forces savings that you had. And that was my theory early on with Bitcoin. Bitcoin got the money, it drained, it was a sponge for the money that gold should have got. So we'll see what's happened. People are still trying to push it and to push it and to push it. But meanwhile, Basel III came into effect at the start of last month, where gold is now completely officially, it's a tier 1 asset. but nobody's talking about it yet. Central banks are still buying it up. Countries are still buying it up. So would that not suggest that, though, then in their back pocket, the idea of a stablecoin or CBDC, if people do wake up and lose trust, they are going to have to back it with something. And how long do you think it's going to take people to figure out that you're backing it with the dollar that has lost 99% of its value? So you're backing it with nothing in order to issue IOUs. We want it backed with something that's actually real and tangible. And that's where the BRICS nations can really step forward, because they can offer a basket of commodities to back a CBDC or a stablecoin, or they can tether it to gold, or they can price because it's a difficult one to do commodities because they're constantly changing, but you can price them in, say, grams of gold. So underlying all of that, gold is just moving along and doing its thing quietly, and nobody's talking about it. There's very little fuss about it. But Bitcoin did manage to pull all of that money that when people realized there's blood in the water, they would have went to gold.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I was reading, I think the asset that would back the stable coin here would be the treasury bill.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately,
what backs a T-bill?
Well, that's just it. Exactly. And then you probably heard of Judy Shelton. Does that name ring a bell?
I've heard the name.
Yeah, and I know they tried to get her in. She's spoken about gold and how to shift the whole program over to more of a gold-backed kind of a currency, and you know the talk is maybe she'll get another run once Powell's term ends. But yeah, I don't. I think, you know, I talk to other people that look at this more from just the social inequality standpoint. And again, I'm speaking for what I see over here, but, you know, the top 1% controlling more and more and more, you know, generations I mean, my business partner, she's a millennial. We talk about this all the time. I mean, well, you met Amy. Yeah, you remember when you guys were out here. And, you know, we talk about it, just the idea of affording a house on your own. I mean, it's not even realistic. You know, and so you have, as a financial firm, we've had to really shift how we define people's goals, because these younger generations, unless they're inheriting from, you know, wealthy parents or something, their objectives and their views are different because they just don't see the possibilities, you know, that perhaps, you know, people at our generations had. And so you know, you wonder, aside from just pushback against this control, this control type of an environment, government control, you know, what point does just the whole inequality is the only word I keep coming up with of the system just become, you know, when does it all just break? And I know that sounds, you know, people have been waiting for the system to blow up, but it just, I don't know, maybe I'm older, but it just feels like we're kind of coming to the end of the line. I mean, do you agree with that, or is it just more kicking the can in creative ways?
Well, it's probably going to be the next generation that does something about it, because our generation's still fairly comfortable. The plan among the elitists, like I say, is to move into a subscription economy. So the debt-based economy is coming at the end of the line. It's not even on life support. It's like it's distributed with the body's twitching. You know, so, and they know this. So how do they get, the only way then that they can think of is, so if we own everything and then rent it back to people, that's the only other way around it. So we have to own everything and then we rent it back to you, so you have to play. And that's a life with an unending revenue stream. So that's where they're moving towards, buying up all the houses. Because if you know that the money is worth nothing, so say we were in the know and we realized this time 6 months, money's just going to cease to exist. It's going to hyperinflate over a 48-hour period, and it's going to be worthless. We are sitting with 100,000 in the bank. What are we going to do with that 100,000? We're going to spend. What are we going to spend on? We're going to buy tangible assets. because we're going to know that tangible assets will still have value at the far side of it. And that's what they're doing. That's what BlackRock are going about buying absolutely all of the. China have been doing it for I don't know how long. But so that's what they're doing. But the younger generation are going to come along, and at the minute it's like a little bit of disillusionment. But they thought that they had them in the bubble of social media, etc. They're now moving away from that. Everything has got so fake that there's a hunger for authenticity. And they're moving away. So that makes them, when you're hungry for authenticity in human interaction, then that moves them away from that level of control. Then they start to get angry about it. And that's historically, we've seen it through many times. That's when things tend to fall apart and there will be a revolution. I am often accused of being an optimist, and I'm not one bit sorry about it.
That's a really great observation. And I think, I really like that you brought that up, because it does, like, I mean, I'll use my son as an example. He's just not drawn to the same things I am. Granted, we've got a comfortable life, and, I mean, I'm sitting here. In fact, you have the honor of being my first guest interview while I'm here in our house in Montana. But he's not attached to those kind of things. And I've even realized too, just in the last, probably since the COVID, one of the byproducts has been, I just don't want to waste my friggin' time dancing around. It's like, I want to be around people that are just, you can talk to and be yourself and communicate with, and not have to put on a mask and all that stuff. But as you said, these younger generations, that's just, it's even, deeper than that. And so I think that's really where the optimism, I suppose, that's really good that you brought that up.
Our generation is quite consumerist. We felt that we need to own as much plastic stuff as possible and buy it all. This generation isn't. And it's up to the detriment of government, because then you're not as, that was a method of controlling us to keep us in the rat race of paying taxes and working. That's not going to work with them. They're not falling for the shiny things and the cars and the houses and the handbags and the shoes and whatever it is. They're not falling for any of that. So they're quite difficult then to control. Now, if we don't do our job in protecting them and stopping this digital ID, they know that this is happening. So very easy to control with mass surveillance, digital ID, and programmable money. That makes rebellion on their behalf almost impossible with that level of control. But something will happen. Something will spark back. Even the law hasn't caught up with any of this. So are we really that naive to think that hackers won't be able to override all of this? And it's even more dangerous because we're trying to get a campaign going here that. So right now, if you've had your credit card taken, you get a new PIN card, and you can reset your PIN number, but you can't reset your eyeball, your fingerprint, your face, your voice. And these are now being used to, well, sure I can, but these are now being used to identify you. And with a 3-second voice clip, they can synthesize your voice. So, say at your bank, it can be at Danske Bank, my voice is my password. Well, they can synthesize that already. So, where it's supposed to be convenient to log into your bank account, you're going to have to scan your iris, scan your face, do your thumbprint, do your voice, put in a PIN. They'll send you out another PIN. It'll take you about 25 minutes to get in. Because hackers, the criminal mind will override all of it. So it's not safe, and the law hasn't even caught up with it yet. So there's going to be a lot of people that lose out in the interim. And I keep on saying, like, what is the solution to all of this? Well, we're in a debt crisis. So who do we owe the money to? Because it's not the Decepticons. It's the banks and the bondholders. So maybe in terms of the bondholders, that's a lot of people's pensions. Maybe pensioners are just going to have to take a hit for the next generation. And we stop with what's going on. We stop the way of the world. Because if we don't, we're just moving into a completely technocratic society where there is the 1% owning everything and the rest of us have to play to get access to it.
You just hit on a point. We've had this conversation actually. I may have mentioned this guy, Charles Hugh Smith. He's over in Hawaii, and he writes a lot about this. He's actually, I think, in his 70s, so he's a heart of the boomer generation, and but talks about we've had this conversation about the need. Somebody's going to have to sacrifice. That's what it's going to come down to. I was even talking to my wife the other, Darcy, you met her too. We were just talking about, wouldn't it be cool? We're talking about this whole thing with the rental. If you got people to build a pool of money. I mean, this is just stuff you talk about, but it's the idea of how ultimately the solution falls in the lap of the citizens, where you could get a bunch of people who had a vision of the greater good, pooled their money and start buying these properties and then renting them for below market, just for no other reason than to give good people a chance to have a roof over their head so they could, get ahead. Because it's like you made another good point. I mean, the truth is a lot of us are, in our generation comfortable. The system worked. It's a timing thing. It's nothing. I don't feel like I'm smarter than anybody else per se. It's just I was born when I was born, and the system was what it was at the time. But there are a lot of people who literally are consumed with just getting by. Literally just getting by and don't have the time to just think. I mean, it's hard to appreciate, but it's real. And I think your point is great. That there's somewhere along the lines, there's going to be some sacrifice involved from the haves.
Yeah. Well, with people that are just getting by, so you have people on welfare and you have people on pensions. They've taken a 40% haircut on their purchasing power. Now, the government had to come in and said, we're going to cut your welfare by 40%. The streets would have been full with people with pitchforks. Same with pensions. But they did do that. That's the inflation coupled with financial repression. That has played out. But people haven't really noticed. It's a slow descent into poverty because when you are poor enough, hungry enough, cold enough, you're going to accept you're going to accept the stablecoin that's going to be programmed to only buy you bread at a certain store. You're going to be more accepting of that. And people haven't really understood that they've taken a 40% haircut, and it's not over. This is set to continue, and until they really won't have enough money to make ends meet anymore. There's also the idea of just if we can encourage, so you pay into your pension fund, but what if we encouraged part of what pension fund was for young people to buy homes, to get together as a collective and buy homes as part of their pension. So they rent the houses out at an affordable price. That pays back if they could just put in a little bit each so there was no mortgage, then that gives them a return on it, and that builds up as they get older so that they have something instead of giving all of because we fund all of this. I mean, where does the asset management firms, where do they get their money from? We're financing so much of this. So I keep on saying it, vote with your wallet while you still can, because pretty soon you're not going to be with your wallet, and your body is going to be your wallet moving forward.
Yeah, that's a great point. In fact, one of our principles, Amy and I have is we avoid, to the extent we can, sending any money to any of these World Economic Forum partner firms, which, it's a surprising lot when you see JP Morgan and Chase and BlackRock and all these companies that, are supposed to be, ostensibly helping build wealth, that are signed on to a company or an organization which seems to be having struggles, but that's all about, like you said, own nothing and, be happy in 2030. I mean, it just doesn't go together. But the truth is, is, it's hard to do that. I mean, the ETF market, as an example, is completely dominated by those three players. And so, it's a difficult task. And that's where I hope, my hope is that perhaps as those companies start becoming a little more accountable, that perhaps the door opens to some of these other ideas. I wanted to ask you one last thing. We're just about out of time, but compared to, I'm specifically talking about where you are in Northern Ireland, and I'm hoping this is ending on a rising note of hope. But how is the view of things? I mean, do you think people, for lack of a better word, are a little more awake than they were 2 years ago when we first spoke?
I think so. I think people realized that they were had during the lockdowns, and nobody likes to admit they're wrong. And nobody likes to be told that they're wrong, but they're angry about it. And now they're latching on to things to express that anger that has been bubbling for a couple of years. So there is an awareness. And when you are explaining things to people, I always say, I think ask questions rather than tell people. But they're starting to join the dots that, yeah, this didn't make sense. And all the data is out now and none of it made sense. So what was it really about? And be kind and accept all of this immigration, but what is that about? So they're starting to realize that the world is changing really, really fast. They're getting poorer. It's slow, but it's getting faster, and they're angry about it. And for me, what I'm doing at the minute, we don't know who's up here. We're never going to know because we can look at the WEF, but who's above them and who's above them. We're never going to know. Doesn't matter. Cut the strings. So what we're doing right now is that we're holding local councillors accountable. The people that you see in the supermarket or down the street, hold them accountable. They're the ones that you pay to represent you. So if they're not doing a good job of representing you, you need to hold them accountable. So go to their meetings, because so much of this just gets rubber stamped. And we have done that. There was an attempt to bring in a health bill into Northern Ireland, which gave them the ability to lock down exactly the same as they did during lockdown for anything. So it could have been a climate emergency. And so give public health ultimate authority in Northern Ireland, and it circumvented the court system as well, where you could be tried without the right to be there to defend yourself in court. This is what they're trying to bring in. We get that shut down because we went straight to the councillors, to our local MLAs. And when you're putting pressure on them, then they have to do something about it. Up until then, they were caught rubber stamping it because the forms are coming to them filled in already. The answers are already written across all the councils. So we had the evidence there. So that kind of taught us that we need to keep it small. Don't try and make it massive. Just try and keep it as small as your local community. See what you can do in your local community. And if everyone did that, eventually that extends out and you actually can make a change. So that's what we're going very micro at the minute. And we're dealing with my local city is aligned to be a smart city, a city of sanctuary, all of this. So we're now tackling them and trying to look at legislation that we can counter with it. It's happening without any, they're not meeting any resistance. So we need to start giving them something to work for, because they're not doing what they're paid to do.
That's great advice. In fact, I mentioned before we started that we had moved, from one community in southern Utah to another. The one we were in, it was just a bunch of, it's just good old boy politics, people that grew up with each other. The church has a big hold. So there's this, an awkwardness, but you got a lot of these people, moving in from other states that start standing up and pushing back. And these people aren't used to being held accountable. They don't know. And it's ironic because what happens is, just the real quick of it is they were trying to push through this property tax increase to fund, I'm trying to remember, another jail, which turned out through some research wasn't what they were presenting either. You start digging and you find out a lot of stuff, you don't want to know, that they don't want you to know. But what's interesting is then people from behind the woodwork, the person that grew up with this person that's a commissioner or whatever, all of a sudden stuff starts coming out and people start getting emboldened, and then the corruption starts getting exposed. And so you're right, to attack the head of the serpent isn't the best way to go. You start, like you said, and if everybody's doing that, that's good. That's good to hear, because I've seen that. And now that we've moved, I was just looking at my utility bill, and there's like 3 different charges for water in the new community we're in. And so, Darcy's like, well, now we got to start going to council meetings here because, what, and so, anyhow, now I could go on and talk to you. It's interesting how you can start off talking about Bitcoin and digital ID, and all this stuff. It's all just intertwined, it really is. And, anyhow, any final thoughts, Melissa, before I let you go? I know it's later there than it is here.
What I think is that it's our job to leave your job, not just ours. It was our grandparents' job before them, and it'll be our children's job. You're supposed to leave the world better, and don't let shiny things distract you. Don't let selfishness distract you. You're to leave a better world for your children. And like I say, you need to teach them that freedom isn't passed down in DNA. It's actively under attack, and it has to be pushed back against being maintained.
Perfect. Excellent. Listen, it's great to see you again. Say hi to everybody. Say hi to Paul. And just thanks again for joining me on Upthinking Finance today.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Emerson Fersch is a registered representative with and securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA, SIPC. Advisor services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and separate entity from Capital Investment Advisors. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. The guest speakers and the companies they represent are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Capital Investment Advisors. Individual tax and legal matters should be discussed with your tax or legal expert. Economic forecasts set forth may not develop as predicted, and there can be no guarantee that strategies promoted will be successful. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. There is no assurance that the techniques and strategies discussed are suitable for all investors or will yield positive outcomes. The purchase of certain securities may be required to affect some of the strategies. Investing involves risks, including possible loss of principal.